while we're touching on the Exodus, the splitting of the Red Sea, and all that, I'm curious why you believe it happened. Um, is there some sort of archaeological evidence you're looking at, or you believe it happened because, in general, you accept the Torah for the reasons that we shared earlier, and it's in the Torah. If it's a story in there, since I accept the Bible because of its innovation and other reasons that we've been sharing, or is there something? Is there anything independent that corroborates, let's say, the Exodus, which is a major narrative in the Bible, or even something more specific like the splitting of the Red Sea? Um, Curious if that's a basis, if there is anything out there, if you can share with our listeners.
Okay, so I distinguish for myself here uh, uh, Exodus and the splitting of the sea. Okay, those are part
Mm-hmm.
of the same story, but the resources that I have to address each are of a different nature. Okay, so with regard to Exodus, by which I mean the claim that there was a people Israel enslaved in Egypt, and that they were liberated and by God. Okay, so let me preface this by with the following little illustration. Um, Many of us who have sat around the Seder table, which I suspect many of our listeners have, probably all,
Mm-hmm.
uh, are familiar from the Haggadah, which the text that we read at the Seder, with the phrase that God took us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Okay, now that phrase, it turns out, within the Bible, is not a very common phrase and is really only found with regard to the events of the Exodus. We don't find elsewhere that when God does a miracle that phrase is used, mighty hand and outstretched arm. I raise this because it's just a wonderful coincidence that when we look at the inscriptions of the pharaohs of the Egyptian New Kingdom, 1500 to 1200 BCE, which would fit the period of the enslavement by traditional dating, what we find is that routinely the pharaohs, the escapades of the pharaohs, are described as having been achieved with the pharaoh's mighty hand or the pharaoh's outstretched arm. The pharaoh defeated the Libyans with his mighty hand. The pharaoh bagged 120 elephants with his outstretched arm, and on and on, literally hundreds and hundreds of times. So that what appears that's going on here is that the Torah is engaging in cultural appropriation. That is, the Torah is familiar with ancient Egyptian writings, the propaganda of the pharaohs, and it's seeking to out pharaoh the pharaohs by stealing their thunder, by using their propaganda against them to describe their own defeat. Okay? That only
Mm-hmm.
goes so far as to tell us that some Israelites at some point were apparently quite familiar with some elements of royal Egyptian propaganda. Now, one of my claims takes that and that argument and goes with it on steroids in the following way. That I claim, this is what you were referring to, was covered in the Wall Street Journal. Um, is the following claim that the story of the Exodus, the Israelites leaving Egypt, being pursued by Pharaoh's chariot army, being led to the sea swallowing them up, and then them offering praise to God for their salvation. There is an incredible parallel, series of parallels in similar terms between those two chapters of the book of Exodus and the composition that I referred to before, the battle inscriptions of the Kadesh inscriptions of Ramses II, his battle at this place called Kadesh against the Hittite Empire. And what seems that's happening is that the Torah is stealing that thunder, which was a very well known work in the time of Ramses and only in the times of Ramses II. We know that even servants at the time knew about it because we found copies of it in their villages in Egypt. And that what the Torah is doing is that it is framing and molding the story of the Exodus so that Israelites coming out would say, "Oh, I get it. The God of Israel is even greater than the greatest king of the greatest
Mm-hmm.
period of Egyptian history in his greatest achievement, this Battle of Kadesh." Um, and that type of thing can only happen if there were a serious number of Israelites in Egypt, and if they had experienced something that they construed as a liberating event in the time of Ramses II. Okay, so for that, that's the short description of why I do believe that there is compelling evidence for an Exodus event. Okay, when we come to the issue of the splitting of the seas, so I don't have the same type of home run evidence. I know that there are people that have seen some type of video that's out there on the internet of what looks like a chariot wheel underwater, and they say, "Oh, there's your proof." No, but that's not serious. That's not serious. And here, the truth of the matter is, as you probably know, Rabbi Wilds, that even within the rabbinic tradition, there have been voices that have wondered: are the events there fully as they are described? Rabbi Soloveitchik, for one, believed that the plagues were as described, more or less, but that they were natural events that happened to occur at just the right moments. Like there's
Right.
exponential explanations for water turning red, or for an
Hmm.
infestation of frogs, etc., etc. In other words, he downplays the kind of supernatural description of the events, and I think Rabbi Jonathan Sachs also in the same vein. What's important for me here, and
Yeah, that
I'm
was the
agnostic.
Rambam's.
Yeah,
That was the
I
Rambam's
wasn't
approach.
there, so I don't know. But what is important for me to underscore here is that we live in an age where either accounts that we read are 100% fully factual, or otherwise, in our eyes, they are nothing but fake news, and they lose all their credibility. And I say that when listeners, if that's the way that you view the Bible, that it has to be 100% accurate or it's fake news, I say to you, the problem is not the Bible is fake news. The problem is such readings are by people who are fake Jews. This is not the way to read the Bible. The Bible, as said explicitly by Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who was the first chief rabbi of the land of Israel before the founding of the state, and he said that the Torah is designed to instill messages. It will take events that happen. If it feels that the events described exactly as they were will instill the messages that the
Right.
authors or that God wants to instill, then that is how it will write it. And if God or the other biblical authors believe that it requires an embellishment to make the events have the type of power, so that the accounts have the power and teach the lessons that readers and listeners need to hear, then it will do that. And the truth is that this is the way all ancient writers of history worked. So there's nothing unusual
Hmm.
here, but it is important to read the Bible in its own terms. Again, not in our terms.
Right. Right. No, you made that point very powerfully.
Hmm.
Is there, though? I know you're not an archaeologist, but
Hmm.
is there any external? All of this is being from the Torah itself. The language, the
Yeah,
appropriation
yeah,
of Egyptian kind of language. Is there
right.
any other archaeological evidence for the Exodus, or any other
Well,
parts
see,
of the Bible you're
I
aware
think
of?
that question is a kind of a loaded one in an unfair way. Meaning that I think that a lot of people, well-meaning, not necessarily anti-Semitic or atheist, have said, listen, we read the Torah and then we go look at what we have from ancient Egypt, and we have a lot from ancient Egypt, and we don't see any mention of Israelites or of Moses or of plagues or of slaves upping and outing. So I guess there's no proof. And I think that we need to read the other way. We need to read Egypt, i.e., you read something like the Kaddish inscriptions of Ramses II, and then you see that the Torah is intimately familiar with it. That's just as strong. And that there's good
Right.
reason
That's.
why we might not find the type of archaeological evidence that people are looking for. For example, the area where the Israelites were enslaved, which the Bible describes as the land of Goshen, is today totally submerged underwater. So what are you expecting to find? Or, we would say, well, wait a minute, these are such calamitous events that surely anyone writing about the history of Egypt would have mentioned them. Yes, except there was no such thing as writing history. Oh, they wrote about the past. Yes, they did that. They did that. But you have to understand the genre of writing. Okay, it's kind of akin to the following scenario. Imagine that you have an opening in your office, and you put out a call for people to submit resumes to fill this position. You get a big pile of resumes, 100 resumes. You go through all of them, and you say, wow, what a talented group of people. Not a single one of them was ever fired. And I said to you, how do you know that? You say, well, I went through all their resumes. They wrote about their entire professional experience. Not one of them ever wrote that he was fired. And I would say, well, yeah, that's a resume you're reading. What do you expect? It's the same thing. The Egyptians are writing about the past, not for you and me, Rabbi Wilds. They're writing about the past for their gods. They're submitting reports about how great they were. So they never talk
Yeah.
about bad news. So what do you expect them to write about slaves?
Right. No, I've been sharing that for years, but obviously if we found something, what was the, wasn't there some reference, I forgot, on one of these slates, an Egyptian, who was it, a great Egyptian archaeologist found Mimeth, not Mimeth, I'm just blanking. Excuse my ignorance. I
The
thought there was
Merneptah
some,
Stela, the Merneptah Stela,
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
reference to
Isn't
Israel,
there,
there
yeah, there
is.
is a reference to
Sure.
Israel there,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. The earliest reference with to the term Yisrael, Israel,
Mm,
outside of the Bible, is from Egypt from 1206 BCE. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's in the Egyptian Museum, and it is by Pharaoh Merneptah, one of the pharaohs. And what he describes there is a kind of a military campaign that he launched into what then was known as the land of Canaan, or today roughly the land of Israel and Lebanon, and maybe part of Syria. And he gives a long list. And, I went to this place and I cut off all their heads. And I went to this place and I wiped them out. And I went to this place and I destroyed it. And he says, and Israel, its seed is no more. What's fascinating about that reference is that in Egyptian, sometimes they give like names, Israel or Ashkelon or Philistines or whatever it might be. And next to it is a little sign that indicates whether that entity is a settled kingdom or a nomadic people. Next to the word Yisrael is the sign for an unsettled people. That means that might be Israel as they had just entered the land, because we know from the book of Joshua and the book of Judges that when they crossed the Jordan River and entered the land, they didn't capture Israel overnight. There was a long
mhm,
period of
right.
unsettlement before there was settlement. So that's a very interesting finding.
And this pharaoh lived after Ramses, the one that we
That's right.
believe
Yeah, he
was,
was right. He was the next one. He was his son. Yeah,
oh, it
yeah,
was the son.
yeah.
And then obviously when he says Israel, its seed is no more, he he's lying about that. We're assuming
Well,
just to show his victory.
Rabbi, Rabbi, here we are, right? I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
I don't know. Two rabbis having this conversation a few thousand years later seems to
yeah.
contradict that.